Good morning, everyone. So let us continue with the discussion that we have been having about internal structure of the Earth and plate tectonics. So you remember we have talked about three basic types of plate boundaries, being a divergent plate boundaries or mid-oceanic ridges, where crusts, new oceanic crusts gets generated. And then we talked about convergent plate boundaries, where crust is destroyed and one crust or one plate, lithospheric plates, goes beneath the other one. And then the transcurrent plate boundary, where two plates slide past each other. Okay. So the first thing that we are going to do today is to compare, say, for example, the mid-oceanic ridge. So if I just draw the mid-oceanic ridge for you quickly. Not drawing properly. Just a moment, I think there is a time lag. Hang on, something is wrong with my computer. Just give me a moment. Hello, are you guys there? Can just someone confirm me if you can hear me properly and see my screen? Okay. I'm sorry for that. Something my computer got stuck and hence uh, I was not able to communicate. Okay. So what I'm trying to draw, I'm trying to, for the first thing that we are going to discuss is the comparison between a mid-oceanic ridge and then I will compare it with a subduction zone in terms of volcanism and in terms of earthquakes. Okay. So suppose I'm first try to draw a mid-oceanic ridge, and as I said, that the mid-oceanic ridge is often dissected by different transcurrent faults. And then if I look at the crust here, this looks something like this, where the lithosphere is extremely thin, very close to the crust, and this is my asthenosphere, of course. Yeah. Now, if and then we talked about the subduction zone or the trench. Okay, what happens in a subduction zone? I have one plate and the other plate essentially is going down. Now I want to compare the type of volcanism in these two particular cases. Okay. Now you see what I observe in case of a mid-oceanic ridge, that I am getting magma directly from the asthenosphere, right? So what type of magma would I expect here? So the magma will have its origin directly from the asthenosphere. Okay, and you have already read about the Bowens reaction series. So this will be very much undepleted MgO rich magma, right? So very undepleted MgO rich alkaline magma. Okay, so that is what you observe in case of the volcanism of mid-oceanic ridge. So the magma can be alkaline. So the magma can be alkaline to polytic, okay? Polytic means it's slightly, polytic means it is, so this is the magmatism that we observe in case of mid-oceanic ridge, okay? And tholeatic means it is slightly depleted. And what happens often that, so suppose I have the asthenosphere, okay? So I have the asthenosphere, the magma rises, yeah, and then I could have an intermediate magma chamber, okay? An intermediate magma chamber, okay? And in this magma chamber, essentially, some part of the olivine crystal essentially comes out from the magma. So there is some sort of fractional crystallization. Some part of the MgO rich content comes out of the magma. Okay, and then whatever is left comes out to the surface. Okay, whatever is left is comes out to the surface, and then that type of magma is called tholeatic magma. It's not exactly acidic; it's still alkaline, but some part of it has been fractionated in a intermediate magma chamber. Now, if you compare that with respect to the subduction zone, okay, so what happens? The crust which actually goes down, which goes beneath your continental crust, is your oceanic crust, okay? And then what will be the source of the volcanism here? The source of the volcanism is essentially is the melting of the underlying crust, okay? Now, when it is getting melted, I mean it melts, and then it interacts with the continental crust. As we said, this is continental crust, so there is a lot of contamination. What it observes a lot of contamination, right? Contamination with the continental crust. So hence the composition of the volcano, the magma that comes out in a subduction zone is often andesitic, acidic, I mean, or andesitic. So the amount of silica in this in the volcano in the volcanic rocks that is associated with subduction zone is more compared to the mid-oceanic ridge. Okay? Now, if we try to compare the earthquake scenario, okay, before clearing this, so the type of earthquakes that we observe in mid-oceanic ridge is generally extensional, okay, because there is some sort of extension going on. So the type of earthquakes that we observe, which is related to mid-oceanic ridge, are generally extensional earthquakes. Okay? Extensional earthquake means the earthquakes formed by normal faults or earthquakes due to normal faulting. We will discuss how extension is related to normal faulting uh, um, later on in your structural geology class in next year. But for the timing, remember, or next semester, for the timing, remember, if I have a direct extension in the crust, what happens in the mid-oceanic ridge, we observe normal faults, and the earthquakes are generated due to normal faulting. Okay, and generally we see low to intermediate magnitude earthquakes in case of mid-oceanic ridge. Okay, in case of mid-oceanic ridge, we will observe extensional earthquakes and earthquakes due to normal faulting, low to intermediate magnitude earthquakes. Okay? But in case of subduction zone, the system is little bit different, and I will explain that to you right now. So suppose this is the overriding plate and this is the subducting plate. And then I will try to define my, so say suppose this is my mantle, okay? So I will try to define my mantle into 3 zones. Okay? Again, something wrong is happening. The whiteboard actually, just a moment, the whiteboard shut down. Suffering some technical glitches today. Just be patient with me, guys. I'm sorry for that. Okay, so this is my overriding plate and this is my subducting plate. Yeah? And now what I'm trying to do, I will try to divide my mantle into 3 zones. Okay. So the bottommost part will be extremely rigid. The intermediate part will be, say, intermediate strength, and then the top part will be, low strength or fluidic. So now remember, a continental slab, a slab is kind of going down through this mantle, which has different types of strength. And then what we observe at the very top, where essentially the slab enters your mantle, what we observe, there is extension. Okay, we observe extension. And when it actually hits the rigid part of the mantle, we observe compression. So the earthquakes, the shallower earthquakes, which are related to the subduction zone, are normally extensional earthquakes. Okay, so we observe here extensional or earthquakes due to normal faulting. Okay. But here we observe at the bottommost part, but the deeper earthquakes, the earthquakes whose epicenters are at a depth, in case of a subduction zone, we observe the deep focus earthquake. They are generally compressional or fast related earthquake. Now, why extensional stress regime actually provides normal faulting and why compressional stress regime provides thrust faulting, that is something we will learn later on. Okay. For the time being, remember, wherever I see extension, I see the dominance of normal faulting, and wherever I have no and hence normal faulting driven earthquake. Similarly, where I find compression, I find thrust faulting and thrust faulting related earthquakes. And because of the change in strength of the mantle through which my subsiding plate is going through the mantle, we observe this difference in earthquake type depending on the depth in a subduction zone. Of course, in the intermediate zone, I observe both extensional and compressional earthquakes. Okay. So, do you have any question around this part about the comparison of volcanism and earthquakes in case of a subduction zone and in case of a mid-oceanic ridge? Anyone has any question? Anything not clear? Please ask. Let me ask. Okay, Srivats. Does extensional earthquake cause normal faulting, or is the other way? It's the other way actually. Normal faulting is the more genetic thing. So energy release due to faulting is expressed as earthquakes. Okay. So earthquakes are the that faulting is the fundamental thing. Earthquake is a side effect, if you like. Okay. So unless you have an earthquake, unless you have a faulting, you don't see earthquakes to happen. And faulting means essentially breaking of the crust, right? So yeah, so faulting is more fundamental. Remember, all the faults do not actually form earthquakes or do not express themselves at earthquakes. We will study earthquakes in greater details in your seismic class, when you will see there are aseismic creep also happens in earthquakes, where uh, the energy is slowly transmitted through the crust and it's not always manifested as earthquakes. Anyone else? Any other question? Why we are getting acidic and alkaline magma? Okay, because alkaline magma means it is not contaminated. Okay, and it has not been fractionally crystallized. So the asthenosphere directly pumps the magma in the mid-oceanic ridge, right? Hence we get alkaline magma. It is more what is that called? Undepleted type of mantle. It doesn't get any chance for fractional crystallization. I hope you have read about the Bowens reaction series or not. Do you remember Bowens reaction series, Sanjeev? Must have been taught in your ES 101, no? None of you remember Bowens reaction series? Who does? Was it taught or not? Bowens reaction series was not taught in your ES 101, in your Earth Science, the fundamentals of Earth Science course. Yeah, acidic magma is more siliceous and contaminated, so acidic. Yeah, that is true. But you have not read about your Bowens reaction series. Is it the whole? Is it the? I mean, the opinion of the whole class? Then I recommend, if you have not studied Bowens reaction series, then it will be difficult to understand this part what I have just explained. So I will recommend that you study Bowens reaction series, and that must have been covered in your fundamentals of Earth Science classes. Okay, so I thought it is already covered. So then that's why I started the discussion from there. But no harm. I mean, please go back and then study Bowens reaction series. Okay, right, for you. For you. So what Bowman's reaction series actually shows, that if I have a magma, yeah, which is rich in which has all sorts of uh, minerals. I mean, potential minerals. I mean, it has Mg, Si, Fe, everything present there, right? Oxygen, of course, everything present there. And then while it actually cools, okay, while it actually cools, it does something called fractional crystallization. Okay, fractional crystallization. Fractional crystallization means that at the very beginning we see Mg rich crystals coming out. Say, for example, olivine comes out, and then after that pyroxene comes out. Yeah, so all the Mg, Fe, the mafic minerals starts to crystallize first, and at the very end, the silica-rich minerals actually gets crystallized. So if you're so the mantle magma that we are observing is completely undepleted, means it has everything, Mg, Si, Fe, all the components that is possible is present in my undepleted magma. But then if continental crust gets mixed in this, the amount of Si actually increases. That happens in the subduction zone. But if I can actually only if I can form a rock from the undepleted magma, like it happens in a mid-oceanic ridge, and that type of basalt is called mid-oceanic ridge basalt, MORB. Okay, it's called MORB. The very typical type of basalt. MORB means mid-oceanic ridge basalt. That is, completely saturated with magnesium, silica, iron, everything. So it's more like a mafic rock that comes out. But then in case of subduction zone, what happens? This magma gets contaminated with the continental crust. Okay, and hence the amount of Si gets increased and it becomes more acidic. Is the explanation more clearer now? Prakriti, Prakriti Thakuria. Prakriti, is it clear for you? Okay, Shivangi, Shivach, very good. Prakriti, is it clear for you? Gaurav, is it clear? Spurti, Sumit, just tell me if it is clear. Okay. So now you understand why the nature of magma is different in case of a subduction zone compared to the mid-oceanic ridge. Similarly, you also understood why the earthquakes that we observe in the mid-oceanic ridge compared to the subduction zone are also different. Okay. Please read Laudy's book. There is a better explanation. I mean, more detailed explanation is given on this particular topic. Okay. Now let's proceed. The next thing I want to talk about, we had talked about the magnetic signature in to prove T-floor spreading, right? That we have seen, we can observe uh, different rock strips of different magnetic polarity in both sides of the mid-oceanic ridge, and we spend a fair bit of time explaining that phenomena. Okay. Now, suppose I have been to the field, and then I find a column of rock all of them are, say, for example, basalt. Okay, so this is basalt 1. This is your basalt 1. is 2, this is 3, and this is 4. Okay. Now what I did, I actually did some radiometric dating. We will discuss about radiometric dating later on, but for the time being, let me just give you a brief what is done in radiometric dating. You try to look for radioactive isotopes in this particular rock, okay, and then say, for example, I find a particular isotope which is potassium. This is a radioactive isotope, and then potassium decays to say argon. Okay, and there is a particular half-life associated with it. Say, for example, the half-life is, I'm just giving you an idea. I'm just throwing you a number. The half-life is around, say, for example, 30 million years. Half-life means you have you know about half-life. So, say, for example, at the very beginning, there was 100% potassium in the system. And then after 30 million years, the amount of potassium will be 50% and amount of argon will be 50%. So the basic assumption is at the very beginning, everything was potassium. Okay? And then due to radioactive decay, potassium became argon after 30 million years, and the ratio is 50%. So what do? You collect a sample of the basalt, and then you try to observe the ratio between your. So this is what we call a parent isotope, and this is my daughter isotope. Then you try to find a ratio between the parent isotope and the daughter isotope, and then you calculate what sort of age does this particular basalt have. This is in a very what should I say, in a layman's language, how radiometric dating is done. Okay, so say, for example, the basalt, the first basalt, I find the age to be around 60 million years. The basalt 2 is 40 million years ago. MYA means 40 million, 60 million years ago. This came 40 million years ago. Say number 3 came 30 million years ago. Okay. And number 4 came, say, 20 million years ago. So this is my direction of younging, right? This is how the rock unit is becoming younger. Okay. So generally you find the oldest rock at the bottom and the youngest rock at the top. Okay. So that is something I did. Now I did another type of analysis. Okay. I took a sample of the rock and calculated the magnetic moment. Calculated the magnetic moment which was formed during the generation of this rock. Okay? And that is what we call as NRM, or natural remanent magnetization. So I take a sample of this rock and then I calculate the magnetic moment. Which magnetic moment? The magnetic moment that was formed in this rock during the formation of this rock, and that is what we call natural remanent magnetization. Okay. Sorry, I said the wrong thing. So that is not called the NRM. So first you let me just rephrase, okay? So I go and I collect the sample and then I measure the magnetic moment. So that the magnetic moment that I observe as it is called NRM. I see. This is natural remanent magnetization. Okay. And then what I try to find out, what was the magnetic moment during the formation of the rock. Okay. So NRM will then have two components. Okay. One will be the primary magnetic moment and secondary magnetic. I'll explain what is primary magnetic moment and secondary magnetic moment in a moment. So we are after the primary magnetic moment. So when the rock actually formed, you know, it acquired some magnetization. Okay? The ferromagnetic minerals present in this rock acquired some magnetization that reflects the geomagnetic uh, geomagnetic field at that time of the earth, okay, while the rock was forming, and that acquired some sort of magnetic moment, and that is my primary magnetic moment. Okay, and then the rock was there for say 60 million years till today. So the earth's magnetic field has kept on changing, and there was, superimposition of induced magnetic field on the primary magnetic moment. Okay? So that had changed the primary magnetic moment a little bit, but there are ways to actually, filter out the secondary magnetic moments or the induced magnetic moment and calculate the primary magnetic moment from the rock. Okay? So what we are after is to find out the primary magnetic moment. Okay? So we got a primary magnetic moment, and magnetic moment is nothing but a vector, right? So nothing but a vector. So it has some sort of magnitude, and it has um, some sort of direction. Now we are only interested on the direction for the time being. Now in 3 dimension, this is how. So this is, say for example, this is z, this is x, this is y, and this is how my magnetic moment is oriented. What I can essentially calculate, I can project the magnetic moment in the horizontal plane, and I can calculate this angle. And this is called I, or the inclination. Okay? And then let us say this y is towards north. The direction of y is towards north because this is the horizontal plane. And this angle is called D, or declination. So I calculate the primary magnetic moment, and then I calculate the inclination and the declination of the primary magnetic moment. Okay. Now, there is a very nice formula that people have come out with, and that formula is tan I is equals to 2 tan lambda. Okay, I don't know how to write lambda here. I'm just writing tan I is equals to 2 tan lambda. where lambda essentially provides you, and lambda is equals to lambda is the equals to latitude of the earth where the rock formed. So I take a sample out, I do some radiometric dating, and then I find a radiometric age which is 60 million years, and then I take the sample out in my magnetic laboratory, and then I calculate the NRM, which is the natural remanent magnetization. That is the magnetic moment as it is. I don't do any treatment, and then I treat the sample to filter out my secondary magnetic fields, and then I am left with only the primary magnetic moment. And from the primary magnetic moment, I calculate the declination and inclination, and from the inclination, I calculate the latitude at which this particular basalt one was formed. Okay, and say I find that latitude to be say 30 degree south, and then I do the same treatment for basalt 2, and I find that the paleo latitude is 20 degree. And then I do it for the third basalt, and then I find the latitude to be 10 degree south, and then I find for the fourth basalt 0 degree. That means at the equator. Now that is absolutely strange. Now I know that, say for example, I have analyzed this rock in Bhopal. Okay, so the rock currently sits in Bhopal. And what is the latitude of Bhopal? Some 23 degree. You have the Tropic of Cancer present very close to Sanchi. So I can take that value 23.5 degrees, right? 20 and 23.5 degrees north. That is where this piece of rock is currently sitting. But before 60 million years, this rock, when this basalt was formed, this piece of continent where Bhopal sits were at 30 degrees south. And before 40 million years, it was at 20 degrees south. Before 30 million years, it was at 10 degrees south. Before 20 million years, it was at 0 degrees south. Sorry, 0 degree means equator. Now, if I try to plot that one, say for example here, let me just plot it here. That means, suppose this is my earth. Okay, so this is my 0 degree. Yeah, say this is 10 degrees south, 20 degrees south, 30 degrees south, 10 degree north, 20 degree north, 30 degree north. Now Bhopal is now somewhere here. Okay. But with the analysis, I can see before 60 million years, Bhopal was here. Okay. 40 million years ago, Bhopal was here. 30 million years ago, Bhopal was here. 20 million years ago, Bhopal was here. Okay. So that provides me, by this paleomagnetic analysis, this is called paleomagnetic analysis, the paleolatitude of this of this column of rocks. Okay, and that provides me direct evidence of continental drift. Okay, I will take questions in a moment. So this is what we call, this is from paleomagnetism. I have got some direct evidence of continental drift. So these are my paleo latitudes, right? So this 30 degrees south, this is what we call as paleo latitude. But you can also do from this paleo latitude, you can calculate paleo pole. Paleo pole means, for example, if my if Bhopal was here, if Bhopal was here, then with respect to Bhopal, where was Earth's magnetic pole? Okay, with respect to this particular continent, where was Earth's magnetic pole? And similarly, you can calculate for basalt 2, similarly calculate for basalt 3, and similarly calculate for basalt 4. And this paleo pole is also called PGP, PGP, or virtual geomagnetic pole. Okay. From the paleo latitude, you can also calculate the position of the geomagnetic pole. Okay. And this is what we call virtual geomagnetic pole. And then, of course, you can plot virtual geomagnetic poles. Like here, I have plotted paleo latitude, and you can also plot. Suppose, let me try it. Let me draw it here. Okay. You can also plot VGPs. Okay. So these are all different VGPs. Okay. I'll tell you why I'm drawing it like this. These are different VGPs. Okay. Like with similar analysis. And you create sort of a path of the pole. And this is what we call as, such paths are called as APWP, or apparent polar wander path. Now, when we see such apparent polar wander path, so this is, I mean, so what I have plotted, I have plotted the position of the virtual geomagnetic pole against some time. Okay, so this is, say for example, this is 60 million years, this is 50 million years, this is 40 million years, this is 30 million years, and then this is 10 million years, this is, sorry, 20 million years, this is 10 million years. So what does that mean? Say for example, it means that up to these continents were together. Okay, and then the continents actually drifted away from each other. We will discuss in detail about virtual geomagnetic pole, apparent polar wander path, paleomagnetism when we talk about paleomagnetism in detail. But for the time being, just understand the principle, and then if you read in Laudy's book, it will be even more clearer. I know this is a little bit overwhelming to grasp it at the very beginning, but for the time being, the message that I want to get through is, from paleomagnetic studies, you can get some direct evidences on continental drift. Now I will take questions if you have any. Okay, difference between primary and secondary magnetic field. So NRM is essentially a combination of primary and secondary magnetic field. Okay, so suppose a rock is formed, a basalt is cooled at a particular place. Okay, and then it acquires the magnetic moment according to the geomagnetic field of the Earth. Today's, I mean, if a particular rock is formed right now, it will acquire the geomagnetic field. It will align, the magnetic moments will align according to the geomagnetic field of today, right? So that is my primary magnetic field. Now, maybe after 10 million years, the magnetic field of the Earth will change. Also, the position of the continent will change, right? So there will be another magnetic field that will be induced upon the primary magnetic field. Okay, and the primary magnetic field will be modified. Okay, then after another 20 million years, it will be further modified. It will be further modified with time, right? So this modification, the superimposition is called secondary magnetic field, and the one which is formed, which is forming right now during the formation of the particular rock, we call it a primary magnetic field. So NRM constitutes of both primary magnetic field and secondary magnetic field. So your job after taking the sample out is to filter those secondary magnetic field out from the sample. Okay, and that you can do by demagnetization. Generally, what we observe that the primary magnetic field is the strongest magnetic field, and the secondary magnetic fields are actually little bit weaker. So you can actually filter out those weaker magnetic field, and you are left with the primary magnetic field. And from the primary magnetic field, you calculate the magnetic moments, and there are two things that you calculate from the magnetic moment. One is, of course, its intensity, which is not that much relevant for the work that I have explained, but you can actually take its direction, and for that magnetic moment's direction, you can find out its inclination and declination. And the inclination you can use in that formula that I have just explained to calculate your paleolatitude. And then the paleolatitude, from the paleolatitude, you can also calculate the geomagnetic pole, the virtual geomagnetic pole, with respect to that particular paleolatitude. Okay? And that provides you a direct evidence of continental drift. Was it clear, Shivangi? The difference between primary and secondary magnetic field? Yes, you have a question.
Yes, sir. So, actually, I had a couple of questions.
Yes, go ahead, please.
The first question was the graph which we are plotting the XYZ coordinates to find out the declination and inclination,
Yeah.
right? So, what are the coordinates basically about? I didn't understand. Like,
So x is, say, for example, say you can choose your coordinates. X and y has to be geographical coordinates. It can be north and east, okay, because they are 90-degree apart, and that has to be your horizontal coordinates, of course, and z will be your vertical coordinate. Okay?
so why are we plotting that coordinates? Because we have to calculate uh, the.
Because the magnetic moment that is acquired by the Earth's magnetic field, that must be referenced with the Earth's geographical system, right? So it has to be. I mean, so the Earth's magnetic field is there, right?
Yes, sir.
So by the influence of the Earth's magnetic field, the magnetic moment in the rock is generated. Okay, so the magnetic moment's direction will be in accordance to the with the geographical reference system of the Earth, right? So the horizontal you have to choose either northeast or southwest, you know. So the 90-degree apart from each other, and then and that will hang in the Earth, right? I mean, it will not be horizontal. It will have an angle with the. Okay, let me try to explain that in a better way. Suppose let's say let me have another whiteboard. Okay. Now suppose this is my and then that's a problem. Understand why this happens. Okay. Suppose this is my Earth. Okay. And this is the bar magnet that we put an analogy with. Okay. And then suppose these are my magnetic lines. Okay. These are my magnetic lines. This is north. Magnetic lines look something like this. I think you are familiar with this sort of diagrams, Yash, right? They are magnetic lines, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So now, if I take a bar magnet, what will happen? If I take it to the North Pole, the bar magnet will hang vertically. Okay. If I take it to the South Pole, the bar magnet will also hang vertically. If I take it to the equator, the bar magnet will be horizontal. Okay. So, what do I mean by that? I can think of that the inclination of the bar magnet at the North Pole is 90 degree. The inclination of the bar magnet at the South Pole is also 90 degree. The inclination of the bar magnet for this time being is at the equator is 0 degree. Now replace this bar magnet with the magnetic moment of the mineral, right? So if I find a declination, so the inclination, calculated the inclination, okay, which is pretty steep. That means that the rock actually formed very close to the pole. Okay. The rock actually formed very close to the pole. Now the inclination can be positive and inclination can be negative, which we will discuss later on when we discuss magnetism, and that will tell me whether it is close to North Pole, whether it is close to South Pole. Okay. And then if it is close to horizontal, if the inclination is smaller, that means it is close to the equator. Okay. So that is the significance of the inclination. And then, of course, the significance of the declination is if I keep my bar magnet here, the bar magnet will be kind of oriented according to the magnetic line present here, right? And similarly, you can now replace the analogy of the bar magnet with respect to the presence of the magnetic moment. The magnetic moment present in a mineral, right? So hence we choose the geographical reference system, and then we can say this is north, this is east, and then this is left, or this z value. Okay? And thus you calculate your magnetic inclination and then convert magnetic inclination to value latitude. Is it clear? Yes.
Yes, sir. Now I understood. Also, when we were talking about paleo latitudes,
Yeah.
I saw that when you were plotting Bhopal ka arbitrary
Yeah,
latitudes.
that is absolutely arbitrary. Huh? You do,
Yeah.
I mean, don't take them as the right values. Okay.
Hanji.
Yeah.
So when you were plotting those latitudes arbitrarily, I saw that you were plotting them in the same longitude. Like, you
Yeah.
know,
So that
you.
is an excellent question. So by paleomagnetic work, you cannot determine the longitude.
Okay, okay.
That's a
Yeah,
limited.
that's what I'm
So the longitude can be anywhere.
Okay. Yeah. So how do we calculate the longitude? Because we know
So
the
you
latitude.
cannot. Virtually, the answer is you cannot. So what
Oh,
you have to do, you have to look at the present day longitude of Bhopal. Okay, and then you have to do some back calculations. But from the paleomagnetic work itself, you cannot determine longitude. Okay, but there are some other principles which I will explain later on. I wanted to explain today, but the Euler's pole. So there are some constraints which scientists have found out, which must be imposed while you determine the direction of the movement of continents, and by that you can somehow have a guess, have an estimate of the longitude. But from the paleomagnetic work itself, you cannot determine latitude. Not possible. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's it.
Anything else? I know I know these are the concepts right now what we are covering and be little bit overwhelming. So what I want you to do to please go back and read Laudy's book, and so it's in a very lucid language things are explained. So I'm sure you will be able to grasp most of it. And while we do magnetism, while we discuss magnetism in detail, you will be able to understand it in a better way. Because then I will start from the basics of magnetism. Okay, so if you don't have any further question, I will stop it here and I will continue with the discussion tomorrow. And we will talk about a very important concept of Euler's pole, which is closely related to Yash's question. Then how can we, constrain longitude? Uh, we will see how we can. All right, then I will stop the class here and I'll see you tomorrow, same time. Thank you.